At some point in your life, you will stare at a ceiling in the dark and realize you have been living inside a sentence you never chose. A quiet sentence, a familiar sentence, the kind that doesn't scream but still decides everything. It decides the weight of your mornings, the tone of your relationships, the size of your dreams, and the ceiling you keep returning to night after night, as if the world were a loop that cannot be broken. And yet, there is a hidden doorway in this very moment, not in the future, not after you heal enough, not after you get your mindset right, not after the evidence finally shows up and gives you permission to believe. The doorway is here. It has always been here. And when it opens, when it truly opens, you will understand why so many people spend years manifesting and still feel like they're pressing their hands against a locked gate. Because what if the gate was never locked? What if the gate opens only for the version of you who has already walked through it? Tonight I'm going to take you into a teaching that does not comfort the old you. It doesn't negotiate with your doubts. It doesn't beg your circumstances for mercy. It goes straight to the core where all your methods are born, and it reveals a truth so simple that it feels dangerous. And the promise I'm making to you is this: by the final moments of this message, you will know exactly why your desire has felt close yet distant, why you've touched the idea of it but not the life of it, and you will meet the one decision that changes everything without force.
Now, come closer. Not physically, internally. Come closer to yourself. Because the real work begins the moment you stop asking, "How do I get what I want?" and start asking, "Who am I being while I want it?" You see, the modern world is crowded with techniques. Visualize this, script that, chant this sentence, repeat it until your tongue goes numb and your heart goes quiet. People collect methods the way travelers collect souvenirs, proof they went somewhere, while never actually leaving the same inner room. And that inner room is identity. That's the secret most people never touch, not because it is complicated, but because it asks for a kind of courage they weren't taught in school. It asks you to stop treating reality like an opponent and start treating your own consciousness like the only place where anything ever begins. There was a man once who carried this truth like fire in his bones. He didn't speak it as theory. He didn't speak it as poetry to make the crowd feel better. He spoke it as law, as inevitability, as the way day turns into night. And when a young seeker arrived, hungry, uncertain, delayed by months of inner resistance, it wasn't the seeker's requests that mattered most. It was the seeker's state. The seeker wanted better conditions, a new life, a different outer arrangement. And the teacher, unmoved by the drama of the world, aimed straight for the source. He did not say, "Try harder." He did not say, "Be patient." He did not say, "The universe will deliver when the timing is right." He said, in essence, start with self, find self, change self. Because your circumstance is not your problem. Your circumstance is your signature. It is the handwriting of your being written across the page of the world. Let that land. If you are always looking at your outer life and saying, "This is why I can't believe," you have reversed the order of creation. You have made the mirror the master. You have made the reflection the authority. You have placed your power in the hands of appearances, and appearances will always demand more proof. But consciousness does not ask permission. Consciousness does not require evidence. Consciousness does not wait for a witness. Consciousness simply is. And what you consistently are within yourself, what you accept as true about your identity, hardens into the shape of your days. This is where the great confusion begins. People think manifestation is about getting. They treat desire like a package to be delivered.
They treat imagination like a shopping cart. They treat affirmations like a receipt. But the law does not respond to what you request. It responds to what you claim yourself to be. And the most sacred, most dangerous phrase you will ever utter is not a prayer spoken outward. It is the quiet declaration you make inward, often without noticing, I am. 2 words, a doorway, a throne. Whatever you place after that, whether it's spoken aloud or whispered in the private chambers of your inner conversation, becomes the role you inhabit. And the world, obedient and unfeeling, reflects the role back to you. Not because the world is cruel, because the world is faithful. If you say, I am always struggling, life becomes a workshop of struggle. If you say, I am overlooked, people become experts at overlooking you. If you say, I am trying, then your life becomes a museum of unfinished attempts. And here is the part that stings. Most people are sincere. They are not lying. They truly feel they are describing reality. They believe they are being honest. But what they do not realize is that they are not describing reality. They are creating it. So when someone says, I'm manifesting love, listen closely. Beneath that sentence is a confession, I am not loved. When someone says, I'm trying to attract money, beneath it is a silent identity, I am not wealthy. And the law, impersonal, exact, does not respond to the surface of your words. It responds to your state. You can decorate your language with spiritual words and still be living in lack. You can write 100 affirmations and still be kneeling before the old self. Because the difference between the one who receives and the one who repeats is not effort. It is assumption. There is a kind of pretending that feels like acting, like forcing a smile with tired muscles. It is brittle. It cracks when the world contradicts it. It says, I'm rich, while checking the bank account with fear. It says, I'm loved, while scanning the phone for proof. That is pretending. And pretending always carries the taste of fraud. But assumption is different. Assumption is not a performance. Assumption is an inner decision so complete that it begins to rearrange your inner world before the outer world moves an inch. It is a seed placed into the dark with no witnesses, and yet you water it with conviction. You assume not to trick yourself, but to align yourself with a truth that is real in consciousness before it is visible in matter. And this is why so many people exhaust themselves. They try to add a new desire onto an old identity, like hanging gold jewelry on a body still covered in chains. They want to remain the same self and simply improve the scenery. But the law does not renovate the prison. It opens the door when you become the one who is already free. So let me pause here, right at the edge of something important, and invite you into a small, quiet declaration. Not for me, for you. A marker in the sand. A moment your future self will remember. If there is one identity you are ready to release, one sentence you are done living inside, leave it in the comments in just a few words. Something simple, something true, like, I release the old story, or I choose a new self, or even, I'm done waiting. Just one short line, your inner decision made visible. Now, back into the depth. Imagine a couple lying in bed at night, surrounded by the walls of a home that feels like a problem. Their body is in the old place. Their mind is haunted by the question, how will this sell? Who will buy it? What if we're stuck? And the weight of that question presses on the chest like a stone. But they learn something radical. They stop thinking of the solution and begin thinking from it. They close their eyes, not to fantasize, but to relocate. They move inward, not forward in time, but inward in state. They sleep, not as the people trying to sell, but as the people who have already moved. They listen to the imagined acoustics of the new place. They feel the air, the relief, the quiet certainty that it is done. They do not beg the world. They do not chase a buyer. They occupy the end. And then life, faithful mirror rearranges the external to match the internal occupancy. This is the part you must understand. The world is not moved by your desperation, it is moved by your dwelling. The question is never, how intensely did you want it? The question is, where did you live within yourself while you wanted it? Because wanting is a state. It has a texture, it has a tone, it has a posture. Wanting leans forward, wanting searches, wanting waits. And the law says, yes. It says, more of that. It says, here is more waiting, here is more searching, here is more almost. So the invitation is not to want more. The invitation is to be differently. And that sounds simple until you try it. Until you lie down at night and the old self begins its arguments. It brings receipts. It shows you the bills. It replays the rejection. It points at the calendar. It says, be realistic. And that's when you learn. The old identity does not die quietly. It negotiates, it bargains, it whispers, just check the mirror one more time. But the one who understands the law does not fight with the mirror. They change what stands before it. They return again and again to the chosen state, not with strain, with loyalty. And if you've ever said, it feels fake, you are not broken. You are simply trying to put new feelings on top of an old name. You are trying to feel like someone else while still being the old you. The secret is not to force emotion. It is to choose identity. Choose the name you live under. Choose the role you accept as yours. And then let the feelings catch up naturally, the way warmth follows fire. Hold that. Hold that like a lantern. Because in the next movement of this journey, you're going to see something even deeper. Something that dissolves the boundary you thought existed between imagination and reality. And it will explain why the world must eventually obey your inner occupancy, even when it seems impossible. But first, let me ask you a question that might quietly reveal the entire reason your desire has been delayed. When you imagine your new life, are you looking at it or living inside it? Because one of those keeps you dreaming, and the other rewrites your destiny. There is a moment, usually late at night, when your mind becomes a theater and your life becomes the screen. You replay what happened. You predict what might happen. You rehearse conversations that haven't occurred, tragedies that haven't arrived, victories you don't yet trust, and you call it thinking. But what if it's more than thinking? What if it's placement? What if every imaginal act is not a daydream, but a relocation of self? Most people have been trained to treat imagination like a toy, a childish escape, a fantasy for poets. They say, be practical. They say, come back to reality. But they do not realize the reality they worship is the last page of an old script. It is the hardened echo of yesterday's assumptions. The outer world is not the beginning. It is the evidence of what has already been accepted. So when you imagine, you are not decorating your mind. You are selecting the state from which tomorrow will unfold. And there is a level of this that shocks the mind that has been trained to believe distance is absolute. The mind says, but I'm here. They are there. That is far away. That is impossible. Yet consciousness does not respect the limits of space the way the body does. Consciousness is not trapped behind your eyes. It is the very field in which experience appears. There was a time when a man sat in one city while his family was in another. He was burdened by love and fear, by the ache of being unable to physically intervene. A young life was slipping. A family member was suffering. And he did what most people do. He felt the helplessness of distance. Then he made a decision that only a mystic or a desperate lover would dare to make. He refused to be limited to the coordinates of his body. He sat down, he closed his eyes, and he assumed he was elsewhere, not thinking about elsewhere, not picturing it like a movie. He entered it. He occupied the room. He became present in a space his physical feet did not stand upon. He did it so completely that his state changed. His mood, his weight, the atmosphere around him shifted as if he had returned from a long journey. And then, days later, confirmation arrived from the distant place. Someone reported seeing him where his body had never traveled, as though consciousness had projected itself into form. Now, I'm not asking you to understand this intellectually. I'm asking you to feel what it implies. If consciousness is the only reality, then imagination is not pretend. It is the workshop of creation. And your life, your so-called facts, are simply consciousness made visible. This is why techniques fail when identity remains unchanged, because techniques are actions. Identity is occupancy, and the world responds to occupancy. So when you say, "I tried to feel it real, but it felt fake," what you are really saying is, "I visited the state, but I did not move in." You toured the mansion of your desired life like a guest, then returned home to the old apartment of self, and the world said, "Understood, you live in the old place." The law is not emotional. It does not punish. It does not reward. It reflects. If you want a different reflection, you do not plead with the mirror. You shift the stance of the one who stands before it.
Now let's go deeper. Deeper than money. Deeper than relationships. Deeper than the surface level list of desires. Because desires are not random. Your desires are the future self calling you. They are the new identity knocking from within. When you want freedom, it is because freedom already exists as a state available to you. When you want love, it is because love already exists as a state you can occupy. When you want success, it is because success is a room in consciousness you were born to enter. But most people approach these rooms like beggars. They stand outside, shaking the handle, asking the door to open. They pray, they cry, they bargain, and the door does not move. Because the door is not opened by effort, it is opened by assumption. The moment you assume you are inside, you are. And then the outer world begins its slow, sometimes mysterious rearrangement to match what has already been accepted. This is where people make the second mistake. They ask, "How long will it take?" Listen carefully. This question is innocent, but it reveals your state. How long is the voice of the one who is still outside, the one waiting at the gate, the one checking for evidence, the one measuring progress. But the one who has moved in does not ask, "How long?" They ask, "How do I remain faithful?" They ask, "How do I live from this now?" And the answer is not force, it is practice. Not practice as strain, but practice as returning. Because you will be pulled. You will have days where the old identity rises like smoke from the ashes and says, "See, nothing changed." You will have moments where circumstances scream louder than your inner decision. That is not failure. That is the old self fighting for survival. So you don't wrestle it. You don't dramatize it. You don't write a new story about how hard it is. You simply reset. You return. You re-enter the chosen state like a king returning to his throne.
And this is the point, right here in the middle, where a gentle nudge might come to you. Not from me, from your own love. If you know someone, truly know someone, who has been living in the exhausting cycle of trying, forcing, hoping, collapsing, and you feel a quiet inner voice saying, "This could help them," then share this message with them, not as a promotion, as a hand on the shoulder, as a lamp carried into a dark room. Now, keep walking. Because there was a woman once, older, worn down, nearly empty in every practical sense. Life had cornered her with urgency, rent due, no support, no easy path. And the mind, under that kind of pressure, becomes a machine of frantic planning. It starts listing needs like a survival inventory. I need money. I need work. I need a car. I need clothes. I need help. And she tried to imagine each one, but the list was too long. The effort exhausted her, because trying to imagine from lack is like trying to climb a mountain while carrying the mountain on your back. Then she discovered a secret. You don't have to imagine every detail. You don't have to outline the bridge. You only need to occupy the feeling of the wish fulfilled, the inner atmosphere of being supported by life. So she chose a simple, potent assumption, the sense that something wonderful was happening now. Not next month, not after she figured it out, now. She repeated it as she fell asleep, letting the words become a doorway, letting the feeling become the room she lived in at night. And time passed. The outer world looked the same for a while. That is important, because the old self always panics during this phase. It says, "See, it's not working." It demands immediate proof like a child demanding candy. But she persisted, not with strain, with loyalty. And then, through an unexpected channel, life rearranged itself. Assistance arrived from a direction her mind could not have planned. The outer world conformed, not to her begging, but to her state. And that is grace. Not magic in the childish sense. Grace is the natural unfolding of consciousness into form.
Now here, right around this point in our journey, let me place something in your hands. If you want to build this identity shift deliberately, to stop drifting back into the old state when the day gets loud, there is a 21-day challenge available in the description or pinned comment. A simple structure to help you live from the end, return when you fall, and let the new self become natural. If your heart says yes, take it. Then come right back here, because we're not slowing down. Because what I'm about to say next is the blade that cuts the last illusion. You cannot get into a new state by trying. Trying is the signature of the one who is not yet. Trying is the perfume of becoming, but creation responds to being. So the shift is not, "I will work until I become." The shift is, "I decide that I am." And then you live as if the decision were law. Not because you are delusional, because consciousness is first. Because the outer world is late. Because the mirror always lags behind the one standing before it. So tonight, what are you willing to die to? What identity are you ready to let collapse? Because resurrection is real, but it begins as a private decision. A decision to no longer speak from the old name. A decision to no longer kneel before appearances. A decision to treat imagination as the only altar that matters. And here is the curiosity that should keep you wide awake. What if the only thing blocking your desire is that you keep returning to the old self for comfort? What if comfort has been your cage, and assumption is the key? There is a strange loyalty people have to suffering. Not because they enjoy it. No one truly enjoys it, but because it is familiar. It is predictable. It gives them a role they know how to play. And the old identity whispers, "At least here you know who you are." But your desire, your real desire, is not asking you to decorate your old life. It is asking you to leave it. This is why the identity shift feels like a kind of death, because it is. It is the death of the old agreement. And the old agreement is not just a thought, it is a pattern of inner speech, a posture, a default expectation, a way you interpret every message, every silence, every delay. You don't simply think you are unworthy. You interpret the world through that lens. You filter, you select evidence, you remember the pain more vividly than the praise. You anticipate abandonment even when love is offered. This is identity at work, and identity is a magnet. So when you decide to become someone new, you will notice something. The world may not immediately shift, but your inner conversations begin to. And that is where your power is hiding, because your inner conversation is the real prayer. It is the real ritual. It is the real script. Listen to how you talk to yourself when you wake up. Listen to the sentences you repeat without noticing. Listen to what you assume people think of you. That is the state you are living in, and the world, faithful mirror, will keep giving you scenes that make those sentences feel true. So here is the practice, not a technique, a way of being. When the old sentence arises, you do not argue with it for hours. You do not spiral.
You do not build a second prison by hating yourself for having the thought. You simply choose again. You return to the new identity the way a traveler returns to the right road after a wrong turn. Gently, decisively, without drama, because drama is still identification with the old story.
Now imagine the person you want to be, not as an image, but as a state. Not as a highlight reel, as a dwelling. What do they assume is normal? What do they expect without effort? How do they interpret delay? How do they interpret silence? How do they interpret a closed door? The old self interprets a closed door as rejection. The new self interprets it as redirection. The old self interprets silence as abandonment. The new self interprets it as space, a pause before movement. The old self interprets a challenge as proof of limitation. The new self interprets it as initiation. Do you see? Reality doesn't change first. Interpretation changes first. And interpretation is identity. So when you live in the end, you are not forcing yourself to grin while suffering. You are selecting the meaning you will inhabit. You are choosing the identity that governs your perception. And perception becomes experience. Experience becomes memory. Memory becomes personality. Personality becomes fate. This is why the law is not a hobby. It is the architecture of a human life.
Now let's talk about the subtle trap. People think they must hold the perfect feeling all day. They believe they must be constantly ecstatic, constantly certain, constantly high vibration. And then they fail, and they think the law has rejected them. No, you are not required to be emotionally perfect. You are required to be identifiably new. A king can feel tired and still be a king. A loved person can feel vulnerable and still be loved. A successful person can have a moment of doubt and still be successful. The shift is not, I will never feel fear again. The shift is, fear does not name me. This is huge, because the old identity tries to reclaim you through emotion. It says, you felt anxious, so you must be anxious. It says, you felt discouraged, so nothing is changing. But a moment is not a home. A feeling is not an identity unless you move into it and unpack your bags. So you practice. You feel what you feel, and you return to who you are. You become the one who returns. And with each return, the new self becomes less like practice and more like nature. Now, here is where the law becomes almost confrontational. You cannot keep asking reality for permission to be free. You cannot keep demanding proof before you change. That is like demanding the mirror smile before you smile. The mirror has no initiative. It has only response. So the person who changes their life is the person who becomes a cause rather than an effect. They stop living as a reflection. They begin living as the source. And the world, slowly, inevitably, reshapes around them. This reshaping often happens through ordinary means. A phone call, a chance meeting, a decision you suddenly feel clear about, an opportunity that appears randomly. But it is not random. It is the outer world rearranging itself to match a new internal pattern. And sometimes it comes through channels you would never have chosen with your rational mind. That is why you must release control. Because control is often just fear wearing the mask of intelligence. The law does not need your micromanagement. It needs your occupancy.
Now let me place another gentle blade in your hand.
Stop saying, I'm trying to become. And start saying, internally, quietly, with seriousness, I have decided. Decide what you are. Decide what is true now in consciousness. And then live like a person who has already decided. Watch your inner speech. Choose your reactions, not as punishment, as authorship, because you are writing. You have been writing. The only question is whether you will keep writing the same chapter. Now, as we approach the next turn of this journey, I want you to consider the simplest, most radical move you can make tonight. Before sleep, enter one scene, not 10, not 1,000, one. A scene that implies fulfillment, not a scene of getting, but a scene of having. And in that scene, do not watch yourself from outside like a movie. Be inside your own eyes. Hear what you would hear. Feel the texture of the moment. And then, let it be enough. Fall asleep as that self. Not because sleep is magic, but because sleep is surrender. And surrender is where assumption sinks into the deeper layers of you. And when you wake, do not check the mirror first. Check your state. Ask, who am I today? Then answer, not with hope, but with identity, because your world is listening. And here is the question that can split your life into before and after. What if your circumstances are not demanding effort, but demanding a new name? What if the miracle is not outside you, but inside the words you silently live under? There is a final illusion that keeps people running in circles. They think the outer world is the judge, and they are the defendant trying to prove their case. So they present evidence, they bring methods, they bring tears, they bring hours of visualization, they bring years of affirmations, and then they stand back and wait, hoping reality will finally declare them worthy. But reality does not declare you worthy. Reality declares you consistent. It declares what you have been living as. It declares what you keep returning to when no one is watching. This is why the last step is not a new technique. It is surrendering the need for permission. It is the quiet, thunderous choice to stop negotiating with appearances. Now, I want to return to the beginning, back to that ceiling in the dark, back to that sentence you didn't choose. Because the secret you've been promised, the one that becomes clear only in these final moments, is not a complicated formula. It is the recognition that your entire life is responding to the identity you habitually accept as I. That is it. And here is the turning point. You don't change identity by fighting the old one. You change identity by feeding the new one until it becomes natural. So the practice becomes devotion. Not devotion to a distant deity, devotion to your chosen state. You become loyal to the reality you have accepted in consciousness. You stop treating imagination like a temporary escape and start treating it like home. And the outer world eventually has to agree, because it cannot do anything else. A mirror cannot argue. Now this is where the mind will try one last trick. It will say, but what if I'm wrong? And that question feels wise. It feels cautious. It feels responsible. But look closer. Often, what if I'm wrong is not wisdom. It is fear of disappointment. It is fear of stepping into a new identity and having to let the old excuses die. Because as long as you remain uncertain, you remain safe in the old story. You can blame timing. You can blame others. You can blame circumstances. You can remain the person who almost, but the person who decides loses the comfort of almost. They become responsible for their state, not in a heavy way, in a liberating way. They become responsible for the inner throne. So let me give you a way to know you're doing it right, not by signs outside you, but by the shift inside you. When you have assumed a state, you stop hunting, you stop scanning, you stop asking every hour, is it here yet? Because the one who has it does not hunt for it. They move differently, they breathe differently, they speak differently, not as performance, as consequence. And even if the outer world has not yet rearranged, there is a calm that begins to rise in you, a strange steadiness, a sense of inevitability that does not come from logic but from ownership. That is the new identity taking root. Now, one more thing. Some people will misunderstand this teaching and turn it into arrogance. They will say, "So I just declare anything and the world must obey." And they will use the law as a weapon against life, against others, against their own humanity. But the real teaching is gentler and more profound. When you assume a state, you are not forcing the world. You are aligning with the version of you that already exists in consciousness. You are consenting to your own expansion. You are letting the deeper self lead. And that deeper self, the I am within you, is not petty. It is not desperate. It does not need to prove. It simply creates. So the moment you stop begging, you begin embodying. The moment you stop trying to get, you begin being. And that is the pivot. Now, I want you to do something right now as you listen to these last lines. Something quiet, something internal. Choose one desire that has haunted you, not a small preference, a real desire. And ask yourself, if this were already done, who would I be? Not what would I have, who would I be? Would you be calmer, more decisive, more generous, more grounded? Would you stop apologizing for existing? Would you stop waiting for permission? Would you stop treating yourself like a temporary person? Now, here is the true final instruction. Be that person now. Not because it's cute, not because it's motivational, because that person is the cause. And your current self, the one who has been waiting, is the effect. Stop being the effect. And you don't do this by forcing yourself into constant happiness. You do this by refusing to speak from the old name. You do this by noticing the old sentence and replacing it, over and over, not with strain, with loyalty, because loyalty is what turns a wish into a dwelling. And when you fall, and you will fall sometimes, you do not condemn yourself. You do not say, "I ruined it." You do not collapse into old shame. You reset, you return, you re-enter, you remember. A king who stumbled does not cease to be king. He stands again. Now I want to leave you with one final, gentle invitation. Not as an ending, because this isn't an ending. It's a threshold. If you feel this message as something you want to live inside, not just hear once, then subscribe. Not as a social action, but as a private agreement with your own awakening. A choice to keep returning to this frequency until it becomes your normal. And as you step away from this narration and back into your day or your night, don't carry this as a beautiful idea. Carry it as a decision. The world you see is not the authority, it is the echo. Your imagination is not a toy, it is the birthplace. Your desire is not a lack, it is a summons. And the self you have been waiting for is not coming from the future, it is rising from within you now, the moment you accept a new name after I am. So speak carefully, not with fear, with reverence. Because in the deepest sense you are always praying, you are always naming, you are always assuming. And the final secret, the one promised at the beginning, is simply this. You were never trying to change your life. You were trying to change the one who lives it. Choose that one, occupy that one, and then watch, quietly, steadily, as the mirror of the world rearranges itself to reflect what you have finally accepted as true.